After finishing The Last Command, Timothy Zahn was insistent that Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade were merely friends. Fans felt otherwise, though, so Lucasfilm moved to nix any potential romances that Luke had in the wings, and they brought Zahn back on board to ensure that Luke got engaged to Mara at the conclusion of the Hand of Thrawn duology. Specter of the Past, book one in the duology, presumably did pretty well sales-wise, but like with a lot of the other Bantam releases, I couldn't find any data that it made the top 15 on the New York Times bestseller list for any week after its release. So I wasn't especially surprised to find that I remembered a lot of the Imperial plotline in Spectre of the Past, as well as Luke's perhaps misguided clone hunt. But it was interesting to find that I hadn't retained a lot of Han and Leia's plotline. I sort of had the main bullet points, but some of the details were new to me. So, a brief summary. The Empire is on the verge of collapse when shocking news leaks out that Grand Admiral Thrawn has returned from the dead. Admiral Pellaeon takes the first steps towards a peace treaty between the Empire and the New Republic. Han and Leia race to uncover revelations that can stop the New Republic from falling apart in the face of the Kamas document crisis. And Luke sets off to uncover the truth behind a pirate ship that seems to contain cloned crewmen. So I find Spectre of the Past very interesting in that I really enjoyed the Imperial characters for the most part, and I found that our main trio were a little less interesting, I suppose. Han, Luke, and Leia are really just reacting to what's going on around them. So much of what Han and Leia do is dictated by the crises that are arising because of the Kamas issue. So it's a lot of them going to places because they have to go here, things are happening, but they're not really choosing to go there, more that their roles as High Counselor or shipping liaison or Jedi Master bring them there. We start out with Han and Leia taking a vacation on Wayland, but Han takes off to handle a dispute between the Diamala and the Ashori because he doesn't want Leia to have to leave their vacation. Meanwhile, Leia, in that vacation spot, just happens to be in the right place at the right time to uncover a thief who's found data cards, one of which is a corrupted version of the Kamas document, which starts this whole thing. Their children and Chewie are pretty much out of the picture. Early on, Leia and Han send them to Chewie's homeworld so that they're out of the way, which means that Zahn doesn't have to write about them, but it also feels a little bit like a cheap shot. And Luke is, once again, struggling with his role in the Force, although Zahn's really taking the opportunity here to retcon some things that he didn't like about some of the preceding books. I'm not crazy either about Superman Luke, but I'm not sure whether Zahn's retcons fully mesh for me. We don't have a lot in this book. More will come in Vision of the Future, but a pivotal one I thought was when Luke goes with Han to deal with the Diamala Ashori conflict. The Diamala don't want anything to do with him because they think that any Jedi with as much power as Luke is in danger of falling to the dark side. Luke sees an ominous vision, and thinking back, he says that the reason that Callista left him was because she was intimidated and frightened by his power. That is definitely a reading that we have not seen before. Anderson seemed to imply that she left Luke because she was upset that she wasn't his equal, and Hambly, meanwhile, implied that Callista left because she was too vulnerable to the dark side and she didn't want to drag Luke down with her. I didn't really get any suggestion that his power was scary and intimidating, but that seems to be what Zahn has settled on. So we have Luke struggling with when to use the Force, when not to use the Force, really going out of his way to not use it in situations where maybe it's to his detriment not to. So it's an interesting dilemma. How do you take a character's power, which is sort of predisposed to be overpowered, and scale it back? And that's the line he's trying to walk here. How do I scale back Luke's Force abilities without completely removing them? We also have Luke and Mara, sort of this weird, I don't know what's going on here. I thought it was pretty clear at the end of The Last Command that they were friends, and they sort of have differing interactions in the other Bantam era books. But here it's like they don't really know how to deal with each other, and it just struck me as odd. I mean, these are both people in their mid to late 30s. You'd think that they'd be able to interact a little more naturally, but that will also be dealt with further in the second book, Vision of the Future. We have Lando with another business venture, sort of gets dragged into the Kamas document crisis through no fault of his own. And then we have Karrde, who, even though he wants to be completely neutral, is always finding himself drawn into the side of the New Republic. He just happens to be there when the data cards are discovered, which felt a little coincidental for me. And then he's sort of there at their council they have towards the end when they decide that they really need to get a copy, an intact copy of the document. And so he heads off in search of his old boss slash business rival, hopefully to get a copy from him. We see Bella Bliss and we see Wedge and the Rogues. It's funny though, the only rogue that we really get by name other than Wedge is Corran Horn. There's a nice scene where Karrde goes to Booster's errant venture, Star Destroyer, sees that Corran and his wife and child are there because Corran's trying to root out information about certain things. But all the other rogues are only identified by their call sign, so we know that Wedge is Rogue Leader and Corran is Rogue 9, but the other rogues could be really anyone because they're just Rogue 5, Rogue 2. And then really, Admiral Pellaeon and our straight-up Imperial bad guys were what I thought the most intriguing part of this book. Pellaeon has come to the point as Supreme Commander of the Imperial fleet that he recognizes they're not going to win. They keep losing territory, losing ships. The best thing to do at this point is to try to work out a peace treaty, keep the territory they have, and maybe even let some systems back in that would want to rejoin. Like his name suggests, Pellaeon, Peleus, the noble Arthurian knight. Pellaeon is sort of the ideal good Imperial. He's lost a lot of his anti-alien bias, perhaps by working with Dala in Darksaber, and he seems like an Imperial that you could root for, even though he's working for an empire that's just bad. Zahn really creates this almost good empire, I guess how the empire could have been. I'm not always sure how I feel about that, but I do really like Pellaeon and find him a good guy that you want to root for. So in this case, he's got to get Moffs to agree with him. He's got to get officers in the fleet to agree with him. He sends out a message to General Bella Bliss to meet with him, and when the book ends, he's waiting for Bella Bliss to appear. A group of presumably Corellian ships attack him, and he's able to tell just from that short battle that someone is trying to make it look like Bella Bliss doesn't want to speak with him. So it's sort of a cliffhanger. Not really though, mostly just setting the stage for book 2, like with so many other of the plot lines in this book. And then we have our real baddies, the triumvirate. We have Moff Disra, just like a little weasel of a man. Major Tierce, a former royal guardsman who served under Grand Admiral Thrawn. And Flim, a con man who's able to look and sound pretty much just like Thrawn. So Zahn doesn't hide anything. We know right off the bat that the reemergence of Thrawn is just a fraud. Flim, the con artist, it's a perfect name. He's pulling a flim flam, has no strategic skills at all. So for our triumvirate, Disra is providing all the money and all the support. Flim is the image they're presenting, and Tierce is the one that's actually puppet mastering, chess mastering this behind the scenes. These guys do not get along at all, but they're currently working for a common goal, and it's really fun to see how much they don't get along, but how much they're able to accomplish. Tierce is very mild-mannered, but hiding a much more strategic mind. And so it's interesting to see how the interplay in the triumvirate changes over the course in the book. When it starts out, obviously Disra is in charge. Disra is the one with the plan. But Tierce immediately comes in and goes, that's a bad plan. You're not going to accomplish very much there. And he's the one that really gets the ball rolling on, let's present our foe Thrawn to select members of the New Republic. Let's stoke the enmity between different groups that the Kamas document has started to bring to the surface. Let's make sure that Pellaeon's message doesn't make its way to Bella Bliss. And let's also make sure that if Pellaeon and other people go snoopy around trying to find important documents, that they're taken out of commission. And with Flim, I really love seeing the difference between Flim the con man and the character he puts on, Grand Admiral Thrawn. His demeanor changes, his voice changes. He just gains this sense of authority and command that the normal man doesn't have at all. And it almost seems as though Flim and Tierce are sort of working together better than any other member of the Triumvirate with Disra, because for Flim's con to really come off, he needs to know knowledge that Tierce gives him. And so Flim and Tierce are able to convince Lando Calrissian, of all people, that Thrawn is back and Thrawn is alive, because the fake Thrawn knows that Lando and Han were with Karrde on Merkur all the way back in Heir to the Empire. It's interesting, though, that in a book where part of the plot line is Luke senses clones and he's trying to track down clones, that no one really seriously considers that the reemergence of Thrawn is because he's a clone. They sort of briefly say maybe he's a clone, and then they're like, no, not a clone. He must have only been wounded at the Battle of Bilbringi and gone off to recover somewhere. Which, okay, but 10 years is an awful long recovery time. I would have thought that the clone theory would have jumped to their attention a lot sooner and stuck with them a lot more. So, Specter of the Past as a whole is just setup. I don't like books full of setup, but I can recognize when they're necessary. In this case, it's necessary. With only 2 books, Zahn is having to set a lot of things into place, and the end in particular feels like blatant maneuvering as Zahn is moving all of his characters into the right place at the right time. So we have Mara, who went off after that weird alien ship that knew Thrawn's full name, knocks herself out in a cave, and Luke takes off after her because he had a rather amazing vision of the future that showed him many things and culminated in Mara lying in a pool of water looking as though she's dead. So Luke's gone off because Karrde asked him to, and that vision was really sort of bothering him. But what that means is that now Luke is out of play for the whole Kamas document crisis that's going to just get worse in Book 2. Han and Leia are off to a conference on Pakrik Major, which is convenient because we just found out that there's a sleeper cell that Ron had implanted all the way 10 years ago on Pakrik Minor. Karrde and Shada, the Mistral Guard, are heading off in search of George Cardass to hope that he has a copy of the Kamas document, and Lando might have a scheme in play as well to try to get a copy too. So there's just an awful lot of moving pieces into place, and it's not always subtle. Sometimes it's just a little bit clunky. I also, the further I got in the book, started to question one of the basic premises of the book, which is that something as simple as the Kamas document crisis would almost lead to the New Republic falling apart. It's almost as though this one thing that a certain group of Bothans brought down the shields to help Palpatine's attack on the pacifist world of Kamas just gave all these other planets and cultures the go-ahead to resume these conflicts that they temporarily put on hold when brought into the warm embrace of the New Republic. There's just so many of them. Like, people side with the Kamasi or people side with the Bothans, and then because their arch nemesis sided with the Bothans, then they're just like, oh, we're gonna kick your butt. And I just struggle a little comprehending how things could get so bad so quickly from one starting point. Zahn does have the New Republic's too big. They're trying to get more government happening at the local level, the sector level, the planet level. But it just feels really fast that things fall apart at a ridiculous speed. I also found that there were maybe some almost needless action scenes, and that Zahn would cut away from a certain scene after a few pages just to make it more suspenseful and then cut back to it, and that felt a little unnecessary. For needless action scenes, I think a key one is Luke at the pirate base. Does Luke really need to be going undercover in this pirate base? And does he really need to be trying to sneak in such a blatant manner? He gets caught. It makes sense. They, of course, have sensors to pick up on things. And then he just spooks them, so any progress that hopefully he would have made is just completely gone because they've abandoned that base, blown it up, and moved who knows where. It almost felt like Zahn wanted to save a lot of the battles and the actions for book 2, so he was sort of pulling at strings to get ones to appear in this book, and they just felt unnecessary at times. And while I found the Imperial characters so interesting, I did struggle a little bit reading the parts with our main pals because they're just not as intriguing as what the triumvirate is up to or what Pellaeon is doing. Like I said earlier, they're just reacting. Things happen and they chase after it. They don't really seem to have a dynamic role to play. Everyone, from Luke all the way down to the rogues, are just blown about by the current that the Kamas document has created. But I do have to say that I think Zahn is doing a good job of almost wrapping up the Bantam era. The license would switch from Bantam back to Del Rey in 1999, so you can almost see the Hand of Thrawn duology as the swan song to the Bantam era as it existed. It's the furthest out in the timeline that we've gotten yet, and it's wrapping up things, saying goodbye to different plot lines and characters, and I'm sure that will continue even more into Vision of the Future. So, in short, Specter the Past has some fascinating Imperials who are both good guys and really bad guys, and it's lots of fun to read about. Unfortunately, this is a setup book. I felt like the maneuvering at points was very visible as Zahn's trying to get people in the right place at the right time. But I love this fake Thrawn resurgence, and I'll be excited to see how he wraps it up in book 2. So next time, I'm going to be reading the 4th Tales collection. This one, Tales from the Empire, is edited by Peter M. Schweihofer, and it features a lot of stories that originally appeared in the Star Wars Adventure Journal.